Hello, everyone. We are back. Again, I think I said this yesterday. I feel like as an events manager, I'm not allowed to have favorites when it comes to events because they're all my babies. But this is a conversation I am very much looking forward to. I used to be a D&I practitioner, so I love having conversations about inclusivity, especially in the context of communities. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists because they've got a lot to share in the next 45 minutes. So Omotola, I'm going to turn it over to you, our moderator, to introduce yourself. We'll have the panelists introduce themselves and then get into some conversation. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Naya, and hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very glad to be here, and we are going to be discussing building inclusive communities. So before we dive in, we'll start with our introduction, and I'm going to go first. Omotola Eunice. I started my community management career over 3 years ago, and I've experience working with nonprofits. I currently work as a community manager with Outreachy. So Outreachy is a part of what Software Freedom Conservancy does. And Software Freedom Conservancy is a nonprofit organization centered around ethnic technology. So Conservancy believes that everyone should have free software freedom, especially people from marginalized communities. I mean, you should be able to use, modify, distribute, and contribute to free software. So Outreachy provides a paid internship opportunity in open source and open science to people who are underrepresented in technology in the country they are living in. And the internship opportunity is for 3 months, and our community is open and welcoming, and you get to network with people. I also volunteer my time leading the team of community managers at She Code Africa, a nonprofit organization as well, focused on celebrating and empowering young girls and women in technology across Africa. So She Code Africa is an intentional, exclusive community that welcomes anyone that identifies as a woman. So we provide safe space, community support, professional guidance, monitored growth, and peer support to help our members scale their technical growth. So She Code Africa is currently the largest women tech community in Africa. So I'm going to be moderating this section, and today I have with me great community managers and DEI advocates. So permit me to start the introduction with Melody. Hi, Melody.
Hello, Omotola. Hello, everyone. So happy to be here today. A brief introduction on myself. My name is Melody Hahm. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. I am based in Los Angeles, California, and I lead community and platform at the early stage venture capital firm Harlem Capital. Harlem Capital, for those of you who are not aware, was founded in Harlem, New York, but now we operate kind of globally. We've actually made our first 2 international investments in Africa as well as Mexico City. And really, we're betting on the belief that we can invest in 1,000 diverse entrepreneurs over the next 20 years. We define diversity as racial, ethnic, as well as thinking about gender fluidity, as well as thinking about ableism. So we have really expanded our own definition of diversity over the years. And it started as an angel syndicate in 2015. And now we do manage $174 million of assets under management. And we're operating out of our second fund. I am a Korean American by trade. I joined a Black-owned and founded VC. So it's been a really amazing opportunity to think about what diversity looks like because I don't operate in a white space. My prior jobs as a financial and business reporter were in very majority white communities. So it's been, I think, especially in the racial realm, a really amazing opportunity for me to learn, for me to really amplify my own voice in new kinds of communities. So that's a quick background on me.
You're doing so great, and you can also see that Melody is breaking grants. So we also have Jephtah. Jephtah is well known for advocating DEI passionately, and you might have read his books, probably his posts, or probably listened to him speak. Hi, Jephtah, let's meet you.
How do I top that introduction now? Well, it's it's an honor to meet everyone from Karina to Melody to Omotola. So quick one. My name is Jephtah Abu, but everyone calls me Jeff. I work for a Web3 company called Amplify. So basically, Amplify creates an SDK. An SDK is like a template where you are able to like build your own stuff from. So we are focused on the Caribbeans, on the represented artists around the world, and we're just trying to like educate more people around what Web3 actually means in terms of like there are a lot of buzzwords. And this topic is not just in communities, around like all spectrums. There's diversity in life, in the workspace, in Web3 especially. Like I advocate for diversity because I know how it feels like to be a person of color in a space where you are usually like segregated upon. And most people who are people of color usually have this what's the word I'm looking at? Usually have this opinion that diversity is a very important topic. And the fact that we keep have to say like talking about it can be exhausting at times, but it's necessary. So yeah, aside that, I love anime. Like I'm an anime fan. I also love talking. I also love meeting people. And yeah, that's just me in a nutshell.
Omotola, I think you're muted right now.
Yeah,
I got that. Thank you so much. It happens. So that's Jephtah for you, and thank you so much, Jephtah. Also, if you are thinking of that person who understands how to make community better for everyone, someone who believes in fostering an inclusive and supportive experience for all, Karina is a sure bet. Hi, Karina. How you doing?
Hi, Omotola. I'm doing very good. I'm excited to be here because this is exactly the conversation that is needed, especially right now in the world. So my name is Karina Morado. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, so another Californian here. I'm a community stakeholder as a recent C-School graduate right now. So I am active in my search for my next community, but I'm committed to advocating for inclusion in the community space. And inclusion doesn't just mean diversity. It doesn't mean hiring your token Black person, your token minority person. It also is the conversation around ableism. It's the conversation around hiring some really great, really smart candidates who maybe are neurodivergent, for example, or who maybe need some certain other accommodations, but they can be just as valuable. They are often more valuable because they're able to point out a lot of the things that aren't considered early on. And so, you don't want diversity and inclusion to be an afterthought. You want that to be part of the building of, your community. You want it to be part of the foundation. And so that's why I'm here to do the important work, to have these uncomfortable but necessary conversations.
Very necessary. Very necessary. Thank you so much for the introduction, everyone. So to start this conversation, it would be great for us to highlight how our unique background, our identity shaped our perspective and understanding of DEI. So I'm going to start. Personally, I will trace my understanding of DEI back to my days in college. Just a brief summary of that. As a woman, having studied computer science in college, I could remember being told I don't belong to this career path. And, it's difficult for me to get internship or job roles or having to prove myself 10 times better than the other gender. And that was what actually led me to advocating for women in tech. Not just that, coming from this particular background, I have this understanding and believe that you shouldn't change who you are, or what you are, who you are should not define what you should involve yourself into, like career paths. So also as a community manager with my background and my culture and being from Africa, most times I have to go through resources, and sometimes it's difficult to just fit in, because sometimes I think and ask myself, will I really be accepted? Will I get the opportunity to address these things from my own perspective? Can I make this particular input based on my background or my experiences? Will it be welcome? All these and so many more. So let's go with Karina first. I would like you to share how your own unique background and identity shaped your perspective about DEI.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I want to lead off with is that my perspective it's based out of the United States, of course, and this is a global conversation we need to have. But one thing to understand about the United States is that when I was growing up as a young brown girl, I was discriminated against. I was made to feel very other in this country that was my own country. I was born in San Francisco, but I felt so often like I was from the outside looking in. And so at some point, Spanish was my first language. It was my native language growing up. But at some point, I'd made the decision to shift and say, Mom, I'm going to speak Spanish only. You can talk to me, I'm sorry, in English only. You can speak to me in Spanish and I'll respond in English. I want to master this language. I want to blend in. And so nowadays, it's actually a little bit painful that people are surprised when they learn that I'm Hispanic, that my parents are Salvadoran, because they can't hear it in my accent. They're surprised to learn that Spanish was my first language because I don't present that way in my normal mannerisms. And so there's a lot of conversations, a lot of internalization that I've done in this country, in this world, because of that. And so it's something that's constantly in my mind. I want to make sure I go out of my way to make sure that people feel welcome, they feel included, no matter what their experience, no matter what their outward appearance is, because somewhere in the world they fit in. They are, that's their native tribe. And so, why can't we all just share and learn from each other?
Thank you so much, Karina. Jephtah, over to you.
Yeah, I think just one word comes into my mind, and that's intersectionality. I think being a person of color, and like one word we always talk about is, what do you identify as? Like, do I identify as a man? Do I identify as an African? Do I identify as he or him? What do I identify as? And I think giving people the ability to like identify themselves is very key. From my own unique perspective, I've worked with various organizations in the UK, from Russia to China, and I know how it feels like to be a person of color, which I mentioned. And I don't know if this is common, but I think black people of color usually internalize a lot of things, and they're usually like they are told to tone down their culture and also tone down their beliefs. For example, Karina will be told like, "Hey, don't like speak Spanish in the workplace. It can make someone uncomfortable." But this is your culture. This is your tradition. I've been told don't talk a certain way. Don't behave a certain way. And it's quite funny because the person that is telling you to do that, the person is not toning down their culture as well. But why do you, as a person of color, have to like tone down your belief or tone down what you like stand for? And I always say, we internalize a lot of things. Maybe we give excuses for a lot of things. Like maybe the person didn't mean it that way, or maybe he doesn't know. But being in this space at this point, you have to realize that your culture and your identity is very important. Like, what do you identify as? Do you identify as a Latino person? Do you identify as an African person? Do you identify as a woman? Like, BIPOC people always have to come out and have to like be loud. If not, you will not be heard. So I think intersectionality is something that it cuts across even community building, because how do you create a safe space for people to be their genuine self and also contribute to conversations? Because that's different between like performative allyship and actually intentional diversity in terms of like that contribution. So yes, you have people of color in your community, but how do you get them to contribute to ideas, contribute to conversations? And only when you allow people to like be their unique selves and be their unique identity that they can contribute to ideas. And I think ending off, I think I had to like gain self-confidence, because coming to the community space was left with like, I was met with a lot of imposter syndrome. Like, hey, I'm a black person, so how do I talk to my counterparts that are white or like European? And I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, I'm badass. Like, I can do this as well. And it sort of gave me confidence, because I think the first thing I always do when I meet people is I talk about myself, where I'm from, and I also learn about you. And I think that's key. Like that self-confidence to identify who you are and also identify your culture and talk about your culture is key in anything you are doing as a community manager. Thanks.
I so agree with you, Jephtah. I first similar issue where I was being told, why do you have to talk this way? Or why don't you just blend in the way everybody is talking? But this is me. Do I have to change who I am because I want to blend in? So let's move over to Melody.
Yeah, wow. So many truth bombs exploding in this conversation. I think when Karina was speaking, again, as a Korean American born in New York, raised in this country, have lived in Korea's over the summer, but that's not where I identified with. When I was growing up, I was first introduced to this idea of, otherism and feeling so different. And I, kind of similar to you, Karina, said to my mom, I'm American. Don't hyphenate me. I am not Korean American. I am American. And then it's funny because a few years later, as I found myself in Korean communities and found more Korean friends, I then went back to her and was like, actually, you can address me as a Korean now. I am kind of anti-American, to be honest. And to be perfectly candid, and I know this is a global community, but as an American living in this country, especially over this last week, dealing with all the tragedies, especially with the shooting in Texas yesterday, I think that continues to come to mind, right? Not to take us too off topic, but the idea of feeling like you don't belong, and let's just call a spade a spade. The shooting did happen at a Latino school, right? So if you think about the kinds of communities who are targeted and the kinds of communities who often have to deal with disproportionate amounts of violence, bigotry, hatred, it does tend to target people of color and people who don't look like, quote unquote, the classic white American. I think for me personally, it became more of a sticking point or something that I realized I needed to be a core part of my humanity, but also hopefully my profession, is when I found myself the only Asian in a room and the only Asian female. And to Jeff's point, to think about having to be an advocate, right? I felt like I needed to speak on behalf of a lot of people. And to be honest, a lot of those times it was unsolicited. It wasn't like anyone was telling me I have to do that. I, for some reason, just felt like if I don't do it, I don't know if, AAPI History Month will be celebrated. If I don't do it, will there be any kinds of discussions about DEI in these really large rooms where we're talking about every other important topic? And so I want to end on a more positive note, because I think for everyone around the world, that Korean culture has been exploding. We love K-pop, we love KBBQ, we love everything about K-dramas. And the world is waking up to that, right? Like from a global perspective, we're seeing the beauty of African nations, the beauty of Asian nations, the beauty of South American countries, and all the food and the richness. We would be so remiss to not incorporate those in our daily lives and to try to figure out ways to tap into that. To be honest, it's a flex now to be different. It's impressive to have a different history and a rich heritage. And I personally am really excited because that just shows finally the world is waking up to the fact that this is all the rich fabric of who you are and not something you should be hiding or concealing. So that's sort of been my journey, and it's been like a roller coaster, but I'm happy to be on the up and up now.
Yeah, different experiences, perspective, and it all forms a unique understanding of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. Everybody has their own background, their own cultural differences, and I think in all we should just try to understand this, respect everyone for their own differences, and let them be who they want to be. So going forward, there are lots of conversations around global diversity in communities. So what do you feel is currently missing from these conversations? Jephtah, let's start with you.
Okay, I'll say think safe spaces, not separate spaces. So a lot of safe spaces we always say are safe, but they're actually separate. And here's the analogy. Like when you have difficult conversations in like big communities, you tend to separate those conversations from those general communities. For example, like Melody said, the tragic shooting that happened in Texas recently, you see a lot of community managers trying, or global communities trying to have separate conversations rather than having these difficult conversations in those communities. And if we don't have those conversations, we can't move forward. Having conversations about DEI is very uncomfortable because, like you said, Omotola, DI is a global perspective. And it's quite funny because once you hear about DI, it's usually looked at in a US-based perspective, like DI in terms of like race, or in terms of like ethnicity. But there's diversity in thoughts, there's diversity in opinions, there's diversity in sexuality, there's diversity in ethnicity, there's diversity even in food. But once you talk about DI, it's usually looked at race. What about people that are neurodivergent? What about people that have different religions? What about people that want to identify as Muslims? So we should think safe spaces and not separate spaces. I think that's something that is missing. And that sense of belonging, I think it waters down to like inclusion in the DNA. I always say you cannot force a community. You can't force it. Like it will show if you are really intentional about diversity in your community members will get a sense of it. Not when it's Black History Month or Pride Month and you like say, let's run something down and get it done, and it ends up doing tacky. Like if you are truly interested about Black History Month or interested about Pride Month or months that mean a lot to marginalized communities, you do the work and you get it. So I think that's just my word for it. Like think safe spaces and not separate spaces.
Thank you so much, Jephtah. Over to you, Melody.
Yeah, I think for me, and I'll plug Harlem Capital a little bit, just because that's obviously the day-to-day work I'm doing. It really is about the flywheel and not being so transactional. And what I mean by that is at the end of the day, I work for a company that wants to make money and wants to bet on the greatest entrepreneurs who will give us the largest returns. However, I think we've been successful in our branding and our positioning because we've always started as a community fund. And even those companies we choose not to invest in, we try to create dialogue, right? We try to give them resources. We try to say, hey, maybe here's one introduction to somebody that could be helpful. It could be an advisor, it could be an extra phone call that could help you flesh out your business model, what have you. I also think we have a robust intern program as well as other kinds of smaller sub-communities that we've developed. And we do a very good job at maintaining those kinds of connections. Because, you know, someone who started as an intern ends up being that founder that we needed back, right? So even though you don't go into it with this level of transaction, I think a lot of the time we end up benefiting and reaping the benefit kind of tenfold by investing in some of those people early on. So I think that's one takeaway I would give to anyone working in community spaces. Don't just have the big asks, give something in return. And if it's not monetary, if it's not even your time, it's just a quick introduction, a nice word, a good email back. Don't ghost anyone. Those are just some practical tips.
Thank you so much for that. Karina, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And so for me, I think that what's missing from the global conversation is global diversity, and specifically that. I think that in the world, in the business world especially, it's very America-centric. And I was having this conversation the other day with Jeff that that there's a lot that the United States does by way of setting kind of the bar, but you know, there's a lot of other countries that are providing quite a bit of economic power, and we are not including those countries. We're not being very specific about saying we'd like to hire people who are bilingual. We'd like to hire people who are able to work on a different time zone, a different schedule. So that's necessary. And then also within organizations, especially organizations that are doing the DEI work, but everywhere, accountability, that's really important. That's what's missing. You have a lot of initiatives where people are doing the work and they're saying, we'll make sure to do this, we'll train you to do that, but they're not holding folks accountable. And you're not ensuring too that work is being done within other spaces. We can do some cross training. We can have some, ambassadors or advocates within each department. That's really important. We need to really attack this from all angles because a lot of this is so steeped in our history. In the United States, there is a lot of systemic institutions that were built on white supremacy. And so you need to go in deep and root out all of those biases that have been in this country since time immemorial, since its founding. And so, accountability, thinking of it on a global scale, and then also having work from all angles. Those are some conversations that need to be had.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And from this highlights that was just given, that these are what's already missing in the conversations that are going on right now, that will take me to the next question. But before that, and the next question is going to be around this virtual first world that we are right now. It's now begin to reflect that, unlike before, where people can run from their workspace to go and talk about all these things outside their workspace, now everybody is together. Most people are working remotely, and organizations are now getting to understand that there is no how they have to do more than just talk, more than just having a statement on this. Like, they have to walk this talk, right? And this, I think, started from, company are starting to do this by revising their hiring process just to increase diversity in their talent pools, and to increase discussion about DEI and engagement too, because in your community now you have to talk about DEI. You have to create support, you have to create learning groups that provide safe space for your members to talk about these issues. So personally, I think the effort has been challenged. And as a community manager, I think now organizations, companies are getting to understand that it's not just about creating a community, having a community. You have to implement inclusivity. Let's say you have to implement DEI. So Jephtah, how would you say DEI efforts has been impacted by our virtual first world right now? Will you say it has contributed to or probably challenge your work as a community manager?
That's a good question. I'll say definitely challenged. I think there's a quick tip I always do when I'm looking for a job. So I actually check the employee list. So I recently started doing that. So if I see it's predominantly dominated by a particular race, it's usually a red flag for me. And when I say a particular race, if I don't see like one or two, or not even one, like 3 or 4 people from a marginalized community, usually a red flag. And I usually ask like organizations before I join, what is your stance on diversity? Because yes, it's very, like I always talk about performative allyship. Like, it's very easy to say we are diverse. It's very easy to like put that small text at the end of your job description. But are you actually diverse? What do your employees say about you? And it definitely has challenged like the status quo, especially in community building and especially as community managers, because I feel like everyone wants to have a global community. Definitely. Like, I've joined communities where even from your personal onboarding process, I didn't feel like I was meant to be there. And that's a bad thing, because from your onboarding process, you're meant to provide a section where I can talk about myself and talk about what I stand for. But I told Karina this, that most community managers or most community have a US-based mindset when it comes to like building communities, in terms of like time zone, in terms of questions asked. And me, I'm in Africa, and I come there and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? So it's just like self-reflection as a community manager yourself, like even a self-audit of your community right now. Like, how many members are in my community? How do they gain access to my community? I think that's a topic we don't talk about, like intentional access. How do community members gain access to your community? Do they gain access to like different platforms? For example, if you put your community link or your community access in a white dominated platform, definitely you get white dominated members. If you put it in a black platform, you get black dominated members. So I think that's something that we don't really talk about, like how do people get access to your communities? And I'll say it has challenged it, because communities, not just communities, but companies now realize that they actually have to put in the work, because people usually say, okay, if there's no diversity in my company, and I'm not talking about diversity as per every Black History Month, you come out with like a very good video post saying, yeah, we support Black Lives Matter or something, like true diversity in terms of like even food choice, like in terms of like retreats, in terms of working hours, in terms of even providing spaces for people that are Muslims or people that are from a certain culture to pray, is something that we don't talk about. So I'll say it has definitely challenged, because it's like now you're not hiring someone based on the person is like a marginalized person, but you're hiring based on you want to create that sense of like difference, that everyone can be in a team and you can contribute in your own unique way. So yeah, I'll definitely say it has challenged it.
Good points, Jephtah. Good points. Karina, what's your view on this?
Yes, so right now my work as a community manager has been exclusively C-School so far, because I'm pivoting from an entirely different industry. But community isn't just community management. There's community everywhere you go. And in every other job I've had, even volunteer opportunities. And an example, at the start of the pandemic, I was living briefly with my mom, who had her grandkids living with her too. And so to see the struggle of having to set up a workspace where the kids can, learn and be distraction free, where I can work and be distraction free, my mom's house is really, really tiny. And so it was just such a struggle to try to concentrate. And these aren't the things that are necessarily entering the minds of managers, CEOs, folks at the top who are living in, plenty of space, who don't have issues with internet connectivity. So another example is that we had some classmates in our C-School cohort who might sometimes lose internet connectivity. And so the idea was from the educators at C-School to have these folks pre-record their presentations so that in case something happened, that then we could still benefit from their presentations, from learning from them as peers. And so, it's just these ideas in mind, these little nuggets of, foresight to keep in mind and say, oh, we really want to include you. We want to make sure that everybody can hear from you. We don't want to just skip over and say, oh, we'll come back later, because it doesn't have quite the same impact. And so, to say, go ahead, pre-record it. We'll play it if we lose you, and then you're going to be included. We'll have feedback for you. I mean, that's huge. That's so important to really make it feel like, oh yes, I do belong here. I do have a seat at this table. I don't have to live with imposter syndrome, which all of us know is too real. So it's challenging. But then there are other things too in the virtual first world, where it allows us to reach out to corners of the world that we never would have been connected to otherwise. And so I am excited and so stoked that I got to connect one-on-one with you, Omotola, with you, Jeff, to say, okay, I have friends now. I have connections on an entirely different side of the world. This is awesome. I can learn. We can share. This is going to be really cool to have a lifelong, fruitful collaboration. So it's, there are pros, there are cons, but I think more cons at this point. There's a lot of work to be done in this space.
Yeah. And talking about C-School, I think I firsthand experienced that because I'm a product of C-School, and during some of our sections, I actually feel very included, because sometimes my internet will just go off, there won't be electricity, and I won't be able to attend some classes. But I'm rest assured I can go back and watch this recording. And not just that, I can continue the conversations that happen during the classes on our channel, right? And every other person out there, they're going to respond, and the conversation is still going to continue. And I'll feel, I have this feeling of, okay, I was actually part of that class. I don't feel excluded at all, and it's kind of make me feel welcome. I like, if it has been there was no record section, I couldn't go back, I'm very sure the only opportunity I might probably have to attend class, I'll just be somewhere hiding, because I don't feel I can even talk in the class, right? So I agree. I totally agree to that. Let's move to Melody. I know Jephtah wanted to say something regarding that, so we'll come back to you. Let's move to Melody now.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I echo Karina and Jephtah's commentary. I think we as a team internally, we're only 7 people at my company full time. So we have a lot more flexibility and malleability to write the rules as we go. So I recognize that that's an advantage, right? It's a privilege to be able to call things out as they're happening versus after the fact saying, hey, why wasn't this part of the onboarding plan? Hey, why is the infrastructure so broken? When we see a cog in the machine, we kind of like are able to amend it. One thing that we've implemented is doing audio only calls for specifically that reason you cited. When the Wi-Fi gets spotty, if there are working parents, they can't be all shiny and happy staring at a camera when they're like cleaning up vomit and cooking dinner and running errands. So it's been really cool to see how that's manifested, and that only can happen in a virtual first world, right? If everyone were expected to come to the office, a lot of those obligations and duties would fall by the wayside, or you would then have to, figure out other ways to juggle. I think there are many silver linings in a virtual first world, because we actually hosted our first ever retreat abroad in Mexico City, and we hosted a community event there with 2 other startups based out of Mexico. And we hosted the first hour with women investors and founders, specifically in the fintech space. And so it was a cool chance to, it's funny, Karina, I was a Spanish major, so I've probably spent more time studying Spanish than Korean. And so it was cool because I got to be the Spanish kind of translator for some of my team members who don't speak Spanish. And then also we got to meet people in the community who are operating on the ground, who really have no intention to move to America or to the United States, to figure out ways that we can bridge cultures. So again, if we weren't necessarily in a virtual first world, a lot of those initial connections would have never happened over Zoom, over any kind of conversation. And the same goes for our investment in Africa. It's a platform called Parity. And it helps different founders find resources, help with pitch decks, all these things to grow their business. Our partner who led the deal would have never been able to connect with a lot of the team if it weren't for this current climate. So I personally am really grateful, and it gives us more opportunities and more creativity and freedom to think what community actually looks like.
Thank you so much, Melody. Jephtah, you wanted to add something to what Karina said?
Yeah, I wanted to agree with like the spotty Wi-Fi can be crazy sometimes, but I think something that just came to my mind was like, when the signs of like a diverse and inclusive company or communities, accountability and transparency. I think these are 2 things that are very key. Like, for example, where I work in Amplify, like some days I don't really want to go on camera, especially like working remote. Like it's very hard. Like I'm in my pajamas, I just woke up and I'm having a meeting by 8 a.m. Obviously, I'll be like, I'm not in the mood for that. But diversity comes into place when I can actually talk to my manager and say like, hey, today is not a good day for me. Like, can we have the meeting like just audio alone and not video? Because I think accountability and transparency, like when people can actually like give constructive criticism on like work play, or not just work play, but like in a community. There are so many things that happen in community that people just keep quiet about. But I think when there's transparency in like the DNA, you can call out some things and be like, hey, I didn't like what you said, or I didn't feel like this was okay. And I think those are very good signs of like an intentionally diverse community.
And to add to just what everyone has said, I think you need to know your members, you need to know your co-workers, you need to understand them, you need to ask questions, ask for feedback. How can you help them, right? We sometimes we are not always right, but when you have this conversation with them, you get to understand this is how you can come in to help them. I could remember when I just joined Outreachy, there's this I'm using Windows, and most of my teammates are not using Windows, but they make it easier for me because they checked online for how I can do my tasks. Even with my Windows I was using, they kind of supported me to be able to use this software in order to deliver my own tasks. And aside that, maybe during our calls and my internet is just doing, the way it can be, they'll just be like, okay, I think everybody should put off their video. Just so I don't put up my video and everybody's video is on and I feel excluded, right? So we need to have these conversations, ask ourselves, ask the members, how can we serve you better? So we don't waste too much of time. We'll move to the next question, and this question is to the community. What does inclusion and belonging actually looks like? And to the community members, what does inclusion and belonging feels like? So I'm going to start with Melody this time.
Yeah, so what does inclusion and belonging actually look like? I sort of have been participating in the chat, and I, first of all, love to see all the commentary happening real time. Something that's come up repeatedly is this feeling that you don't need to feel like a burden when you're asking for help or for asking for space. And what Karina had mentioned earlier too, like you belong at the table, you belong in the room, and it's not sort of an afterthought or something where you feel like you have an asterisk next to you. So I think that's what it actually looks like, whether that's, seeing people who look so different from you, allowing for all that accessibility, for captions, for things across the board that we sort of think of as afterthoughts, for that to be a central part of building out community. I think what it feels like is that you can have a place where you are every facet of yourself. And it's not to say you have to talk about every facet of yourself all the time. Like at the end of the day, people are joining communities in different spaces, oftentimes for work, right? So I come from a practical mindset of there are certain times and places and spaces where that's allowed and that should be done. But there are certain contexts where you don't necessarily have to be leaning into that dialogue all the time. However, if you do, and if there's something where you can relate to someone, you can empathize with someone, you should feel like you can freely speak about it. And you should feel like you can, be someone that they can turn to if you want to have that support. So all that to say, I think it feels like, I don't want to say the word family because I think that can sometimes be toxic to conflate family with different spaces. But I do think it feels maybe like the closest version of like a warm hug or that kind of fluffiness in a space, in a community.
Yeah, I support that. Karina, what do you feel?
Yeah, Omotola, I just wanted to point out that it looks like we've got some questions in the Q&A, and I think we've only got a few minutes left. So maybe if we want to transition over to that. And if you don't mind, I see a question that I can answer and go ahead and take over right now. So there is a question about wanting to give people the ability to put their preferred pronouns when they register for the community. Do you think that should be optional or required? And for me, I think that should be required, and because that is precisely part of building that safe space. If it's optional and people have to go and look out for it, sometimes even folks that are allies might not have the ability to just keep that in mind of like, oh, I have to go, because it's not something that's always at the forefront for them. But if it's a requirement, then they have to fill it out, then they have to think about it, and then they just, they set it, they forget it. But for everybody else where this is really important for them, you just build that right into the community. That's a safe space.
Yeah, let's do it this way. So in summary, so Jephtah, this is for you. In summary, what advice will you give for others who are looking to involve DEI efforts in their own communities?
Okay, I feel like I've had this conversation almost every day, but I think the first question I always ask is why? Like, know your why. Like, people always want to involve DI for different reasons. Some good, some bad, actually. Like, I want to add DEI to my company to increase my social capital. I want to have DEI to my company to like increase diverse opinions. So I think knowing your why is first. I think the second question is like do a self-audit. Like I feel like most people, myself included, were in a bubble. For example, I'm in Africa, and most of my conversations around community building and community like growth has been involved with people that are Africans too, and that puts me in a bubble. So DI to me was all about culture and tradition, and I tend to like ignore other aspects of DI in terms of like sexuality, in terms of like ethnicity. For example, in Nigeria I'm from, it's a crime as a gay person to actually get married. But as a DI advocate or as someone that is truly intentional about like learning so much about diversity, I couldn't ignore like what people's sexuality. I couldn't ignore people's pronouns. I couldn't ignore a lot of things. So I had to learn it as a full spectrum. So I would say my advice to you is don't look at DEI as just one spectrum or what you know. Like go out of your bubble. Like what does diversity mean to someone in Asia? What does diversity mean to a Latino American? What does diversity mean to a gay Black person? So learning what DI means across all spectrums, in terms of even neurodiversity, in terms of like mental and physical capability, in terms of a lot, I think that's important. And I'm going to end there because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, we have just few minutes left. And I would like to say this, for people who are looking at bringing or encouraging DEI in their communities, it starts from onboarding. And talking about pronouns, I also support the fact that it's not supposed to be required, but instead you can encourage it. Why not use general gender neutral pronouns? You can encourage your members to, if I have not specified to use she, her, why don't you just use they, them for me if you're not sure? I think that goes for everyone. But if I want you to address me as he, him, I can go ahead and just include that. Just the same way I can see that Karina wants, I've indicated that their pronoun is she, her. I can go ahead to address Karina that way. I can go ahead and address Jephtah, they, them. I think that is okay. So it's in general, it's just to encourage your members to be to respect DEI efforts in the community. And also, before I go back to, I think most communities, we need to start to acknowledge DEI efforts, starting from the managerial level. Like, we need to be intentional about this, right? So any last summary, do you want to add something? That's for Melody. Do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah,
Call it a day?
I guess just TLDR, this was a very informative conversation for me as well. So I'm grateful. I think we are living out this community principle of being like a well, right? Like an interminable well where all of us are contributing and all of us are hopefully taking something to drink. But ultimately, I think I agree with you, Omotola, that there should be this pressure on management and pressure from above. But I will say, for your own peace of mind, for your own sanity, for your own joy, if you don't see a space that exists, you should make one and join one and find someone, right? It can be one other human being. It can be a dog, whatever, where you feel like you have some sort of camaraderie and you have this ecosystem where you can actually have that safe space. So I think I'll just leave it at that we can implement all these things. And we know we threw a lot at you, but at the same time, community really can be as small as you want it, as long as there is a common shared thread.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Melody, Jephtah, and Karina. In summary, we just want to encourage community managers to provide safe space for their members, know your members, provide opportunity for them to be who they are without changing who they actually are, be consistent with your DEI efforts, collaborate with other organizations who are probably walking the talk of DEI efforts. And as a community team, your management should be accountable towards this effort. So to our audience out there, feel free to connect with us. We'll be in the chat section to answer some of the questions and join the conversation going on. Thank you so much, CMX, for giving us this opportunity. We are really grateful. And if you're looking for someone passionate about bringing inclusiveness to your community, Karima is there for a grab. And Jephtah and Melody are here to speak about it, just as myself. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our amazing panelists for this just incredibly insightful conversation. Thank you to everyone in the chat. I'm actually going to really quickly plug something, so I'm going to have to go off screen. There's too many of us up here right now, so it won't actually let me share my screen. But we actually are dropping a C-School course on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging and community. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat. It is taught by Shayna Summers. So some of y'all might have seen her here yesterday. I highly encourage you to sign up to find out when enrollment goes live. I'll get to post the QR code for y'all later. But thank you to our amazing panelists. I greatly enjoyed this conversation. I hope y'all did. And we will be back literally in like a minute for our next conversation, product design with community in mind. So please stick around. We'll be right back. Thank you so much.